You're watching Power Nation.
This time on Engine Power,
Now this is kind of the moment of truth.
I kind of already know what the truth is. We continue testing our 302 small block Ford and 305 small block Chevy in our small displacement showdown with budget upgrades that were picked by you.
We're going to put the most popular and supposedly best production heads for each engine against each other. And at the end of the day, the data will tell the truth.
That's big numbers. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Engine Power. Today we're going to learn together, we're going to have some fun with some junkyard engines, and we're going to do it on a budget. This is round 2 of our small displacement showdown with our small block Chevy and small block Ford.
Now, in round 1, we took our 302 and 305 and put them on the dyno to get some baseline numbers. Then we put similarly spec'd parts on them and ran them again. And lo and behold, they made similar power numbers. So we took your suggestions and got some more parts that are economically priced, and we're gonna run them again on the dyno to see what it made. But to see where these engines are right now, what they made, and what got everybody all fired up, check this out. We wanted to put some real data behind the classic small block Ford versus small block Chevy debate that still rages to this day. And we picked up a bone stock 302 and 305 since they're the most common and affordable engine for each. The baseline dyno numbers aren't what we were focusing on, but we had to start from somewhere, and the 1990 302 came in at a strong 251 horsepower and 303 pound-feet of torque. Once we got the stock 1984 305 on the dyno, it definitely lacks some luster in the power department compared to the Ford, mostly due to the factory flat tappet cam, and only made 209 horsepower, but it was close on torque at 301 pound-feet. With baselines established, it was time to tear into each of the engines in order to give them a reliable, budget-minded upgrades, and we gave them each a quick and dirty cleaning to remove as much gunk as we could. We tried to use as similar of parts as possible, and we didn't even crack the heads off of them.
The 305's cam had specs of 218 and 224 at 50,000 lift for duration, an LSA of 110, and valve lifts of 495 on the intake and 502 on the exhaust. It was followed by a set of new retrofit hydraulic roller lifters, new hydraulic roller valve springs, the stock rockers, and then the engine was topped with an Edelbrock Torquer 2 intake manifold. The 302's cam specs were also 218, 224 at 50 with a 110 LSA and had a close 514 thousandths valve lift on the intake and exhaust. It was wrapped up with stock replacement roller lifters, similarly spec'd valve springs, stock rockers again, and the same Edelbrock Torquer 2 intake manifold. We ran both engines with Phytech's ready-to-run ignition system and an Edelbrock 650 CFM VRS 4150 carburetor for our comparison tests back in the dyno cell. It's no surprise, given their similar displacement, head flow, and cam specs, that the engines laid down almost identical power curves, with both making 302 horsepower and 328 pound-feet. We got a ton of great feedback from those tests, and the big thing that we heard was that we should have used the later model Vortec heads for the 305, and on the 302 we should have got a set of GT40P heads, because these are supposedly the best production heads you can get for these engines. So that's what we're going to do today.
So we're going to stick them on the engines along with matching new single plane intakes, and we're even going to throw in some higher ratio rockers. But first, we have to baseline these again because we have a new setup on the dyno, so we want accurate numbers. So how are we going to determine this?
Which one goes first? We can flip a coin. I got a
coin flip. All right.
Ready?
Ford heads.
Ford first.
Ford it is. The only slight change we'll be making is switching from Edelbrock's 650 CFM VRS 4150 carb to their 850 CFM version that has annular boosters to test it out in anticipation of our upgrades.
Made a few runs just to get some heat into the engine and get some averaging data. I think we're ready for the last one.
We have new day, we have different gasoline.
Yep.
There's just a whole bunch of different factors, but baseline is baseline, right?
Yep.
Once this is where we're starting from, this is where we're gonna measure all of our changes off from.
This same RPM range, 2 to 6,000. See what she does.
That's going to be very, very close.
Close, yeah. All right, I'll take that. 323 pound-feet.
Yeah. So it is 306.9 horsepower. The curve is in the same area. I think that's a great baseline.
Yeah, I think that's solid, and now we just have to get this one off, get that Chevy on.
Put that Chevrolet on.
The dyno water hasn't even cooled. In less than 30 minutes, we got our blue oval off and our bow tie on and running.
All right, we got our 305 on, it runs. It's just like it was when it came off, right? You don't touch a distributor, you just hook power, water, and fuel to it and light it.
Didn't have to touch the distributor, all we had to do was slap a carburetor on it and run it. 2,000 to 6,000 just like the Ford, and we know they're very, very close from last time, so we'll see how close they are again and go from there.
We're at operating temp, so hit start and away we go.
$323 pound-feet.
It's the same. It's literally the same pole, right?
Yep.
That's about as good, I think, as we're going to get.
So now we just have to do all the work and change all the parts.
Yeah, we definitely got a good baseline. So, on to the work.
Yep.
Up next, we show you our plans for testing before we dig into our blue oval, getting our first look at this 35-year-old engine.
All right. Now that we have solid baseline numbers on our 302 and our 305, we can start tearing into them to do our upgrades. Like we said before, we're going to do a head, rocker, and intake swap, and we are only going to tear them down enough to do those upgrades. We're not going to take anything else off of them. But speaking of our upgrades, let's show you what we got. We wanted to keep these projects relatively relatable and affordable, so we set an arbitrary budget for each engine of $1,500. That's what we could save up in about 6 months if we ate ramen noodles, cashed in pop cans, and sold our plasma. But this is what we can get for that amount of money, and this is parts and gaskets and everything all included. For the Chevy, we have a set of 059 reproduction castings. These are supposed to be the best production 305 head that you can get. They have a 1940 intake valve, a 1500 exhaust. They are housed in a 58cc chamber, and it has a 170cc intake runner. These were $850 for the pair for a brand new reproduction head shipped to our door in 2 days. Now we're going to take both engines and up the rocker ratio by 1/10. So we have a 1.6 ratio set of Proform rockers from Summit Racing Equipment. These were $226. Now because the Vortex use a different style intake manifold, it has a vertical bolt pattern instead of the angled, we did get a new manifold. This is a Holley 4150 series manifold. This is $378 and will allow us to run our carburetor with our 305.
Moving over to the Ford side of things, we did the same thing. We sourced what the internet says is the best flowing OEM iron head for the 5-liter. These are a GT40 P casting, so they come with a 1840 intake valve, 1460 exhaust valve, housed in a 58cc chamber. These have a 145cc runner. Our rockers are also an increased ratio. They're 1.7 to keep the playing field even, and that goes with a new single plane intake for the Ford, which has a comparable plenum depth and runner length as the Chevy. All this stuff still under our budget. A completely redone set of heads, $700. How much for these rockers?
$228.
$228 and under $400 for the manifold. We're going to put all this stuff on and we're going to see how this stuff affects our power. We are going to reuse all the parts that we can on these engines, like the headers, distributors, spark plug wires, and such. Everything is carefully inspected and organized during disassembly, and we can tell by the condition of the spark plugs how good the tune-up is and how good the cylinders are sealing. With the small single plane unbolted and wedged free, we can start removing the rocker arms and push rods at TDC compression stroke in the firing order. The head bolts are broken loose for the first time in 35 years, and with them out, we get the first look inside the cylinders once we pull the heads off.
Well, it was running really nicely, wasn't burning oil or anything crazy.
Ran fine.
All of our upgrades are based on data. So we flow tested our new GT40P and 059 Vortex heads on our Superflow SF750 flow bench. Now that our Ford's E7TE heads are off, we can see how they compare with our new setup. The GT40Ps show gains at every lift point between 100 and 600 thousandths of an inch, with a peak CFM gain of 26 and average gains of 17 CFM.
Very nice.
All right, now that we have flow numbers on our GT40B heads, we need to get them reassembled before we can get them on. We're gonna take our valve train off our first iteration and put them on these heads. We've already gone ahead and measured everything and set them up with all the same hardware. So we're at 135 pounds of seat pressure and 380 pounds of open pressure. So we just need to get those springs on here and then we can bolt our heads on.
We already cleaned the gasket surfaces on the block and the new composite style head gaskets with a 4/100 bore and 40 thousandths compressed thickness go on in the proper orientation with the coolant passages open in the back. With a tighter 58cc combustion chamber on our new heads, we have an increased static compression ratio on the factory 9.02 to 1 to 9.56 to 1.
Following our budget, we are reusing the stock head bolts, and since the bottom holes go into the coolant passages, all the fasteners receive thread sealant before installation. They are torqued in 3 stages to a final value of 70 pound-feet. Because we are changing the rocker arm, we did check rocker geometry and measure for pushrod length, and we were actually able to reuse our comp 6/400 long 5/16 diameter chromoly pushrods in this build.
Each pair of rocker arms can be installed and torqued to 30 pound-feet at top dead center on the compression stroke of each cylinder in the firing order, which on this engine is 13726548. With new Felpro 1250 intake gaskets and beads of silicone laid down, our new Holley single plane intake manifold can be set on and the factory intake bolts reused. They all have thread sealer applied and are tightened down evenly to 24 pound-feet. Because of our new pedestal rocker setup, the factory valve covers will not clear, so we pulled these cheap stamped steel chromies off the shelf to wrap up this blue oval.
Up next, we tear into our 305. We find out if that Vortec hype is real.
What he said. With the Ford all ready to go, it is the Chevy's turn to get some parts put on it. Now, all this is going to look very similar because essentially we're doing the same thing.
After getting the spark plug wires and valve covers off, the distributor can pop out and the headers can be unbolted from the engine. The Chevy intake comes off and the lifter valley looks just as clean as we left it.
The locking rocker nuts are unthreaded by hand to remove the rockers in pairs at TDC compression stroke, so there's no spring load on them. Unsure whether or not this engine has ever been apart, we can break each head bolt loose and remove the heads to find out.
OG.
It is OG.
And it looks good.
From the condition of the rest of the engine, I thought it was going to be way worse.
Me too. I think this thing, probably not as many miles as we thought, but probably just not as well maintenanced as it could have been. Comparing the original 601 305 heads to our new 059 castings, we are looking at serious gains everywhere in the flow department. Peak gains happen at 500 thousandths inch of lift with 35 CFM, and the average CFM increase is 24.
Just like the Ford, all of our springs and hardware can be swapped right over to the new head, and we have already checked our installed heights and spring pressures to make sure they are the same as before. These springs are set up at 135 pounds of seat pressure and 385 pounds of open pressure, very similar to our 302.
The 059 heads still have a 58cc combustion chamber, but since the new composite stock replacement gasket is thicker than the OE one, the engine now has a lower static compression ratio, down from 9.03 to 8.56 to 1. The original head bolts were cleaned and are reused with non-hardening sealer on the threads. They are torqued in 3 equal stages to a final value of 65 pound-feet. Our reproduction heads came with new thread-in 3/8 rocker studs, and since some protrude in the intake ports, they all receive sealer and are torqued to 50 pound-feet.
Just like the Ford, we were able to reuse our TrickFlow 7-inch 300 long 5/16 push rods after checking valve train geometry, and they receive extreme pressure lube on both ends. The Proform roller rockers are installed in pairs at TDC compression stroke in the firing order, which is 184-36572. You can see how the roller tip has guides on it that keep it centered on the valve stem, which eliminates the need for pushrod guide plates on these heads. Preload on each is set at 1/2 turn past 0 lash. With beads of RTV laid down on the china walls and a new set of Vortex style intake gaskets laid down, the matching 4150 Holley intake can be dropped on and the intake bolts torqued with thread sealer to 25 pound-feet.
With our new heads, we have to switch to a center bolt valve cover, so we pulled these cast aluminum ones off the shelf to seal up our 305. To the dyno.
Coming up, with this round of mods done, we're taking both of these engines to the lie detector.
It's Ford versus Chevy, and I have a feeling at the end of this, one of you might be disappointed, but remember, you asked for it.
All right, our small block Ford is on, it's running. We've made some preliminary pulls, getting our timing and fuel where it's supposed to be, and it is running really nice. So now, time to get some data numbers on this. We've made some changes. It's going to respond just like anything else that you increase airflow with.
Yep.
So
We have higher CFM in the heads. We have a slightly larger intake manifold. Other than that, the setup is pretty much the same dyno headers. I know a lot of people, GT40P heads have the weird spark plug angle and you gotta get different headers. These actually work perfectly, just put 90-degree boots on them. Yep. So we, I guess, lucked out there maybe. And we put a 1-inch 4-hole tapered Wilson spacer on it. We're gonna do that on both. 850 carb, same. 38 degrees of timing is kind of where we landed, and I think we're ready to get some numbers.
all right, let's see if we can hurt some feelings here.
Yeah.
Nice.
Okay, I'll take that. 339 pound-feet.
Yep.
And 343 horsepower.
Man, okay.
That's big gains, I would
big
say.
at 6,000. We'll have to overlay that graph.
Yeah, back it up real quick.
Let's make another run on that.
I'm actually super happy with that. I mean,
me too. The oil pressure is good.
That's an overlay.
Look at that. That's an overlay.
That's an overlay.
We'll take that.
339.5 and 344.5.
Oh, it squeaked out another horse pressure up top. We'll have to overlay that graph.
The way it carries is awesome.
It carries past 3,800 really well and didn't lose essentially anything down low.
At 6,000 peak RPM, oh my gosh, we're up 40, well, I call that 41 pound-feet, and we're up 46 horsepower, which, I mean, that's big numbers.
I think that's a huge amount of power for an iron head factory deal.
All right, so we have solid numbers on our 302. Now it's time to see how it stacks up.
See if this Chevrolet is going to do any better.
The Ford is quickly disconnected from the dyno and rolled out of the cell to make room for our 305. All of the parts to make it run and keep the testing consistent are swapped over from the Ford, and then in under 20 minutes, we are ready to hit the key. All right, got our 305 running, got all our values changed over, made a couple test runs just to get some heat in the engine and figure out timing for our new heads and all that kind of stuff. And now this is kind of the moment of truth. 2 to 6, just like the Ford. Ready?
Oh, I'm ready. Oh, that's nice.
I kind of expected. Let's see what we got here. Okay. Yeah, 318 for torque and 326 for power. Which, let's make a backup run. We'll just see if it prints the same numbers, and then we'll overlay and compare it.
Yep.
Ready?
That is going to be essentially an overlay.
327 horsepower, 317 pound-feet. So, I mean, we have good consistent temperatures, everything's the same.
It's down a little bit on torque. It makes more power up top, which that's what more airflow should, but with the obvious, elephant in the room is the compression is different, right?
Yeah.
And that is a completely great illustration of what that does because of going through the bottom, going through mid-range, very, very prevalent.
Yeah.
On the top though, more airflow, more power.
It kind of debunks the myth of valve shrouding on cylinder shrouding on 305s, because that's what everybody's going to say is that the bigger heads or the better heads weren't a benefit because the cylinder's so small. But this clearly shows contrary to that.
The overlay versus the Ford now is the big concern, right?
Yeah, there's the difference between our Ford and our Chevy in their current state.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, if you look at mid-range torque, Ford's killing it, beating it by a respectable margin.
So this is a fantastic illustration from a data standpoint of what compression does in an engine.
We had a budget, we stuck to it.
Yeah.
Both engines use a stock replacement gasket that you would get from the store,
right.
but because that GT40P head has a 58cc chamber,
right.
it bumped up half a point of compression, and the Chevy actually lost half a point because that stock steel shim gasket was so small.
Yep.
So now we have a separation of a whole point of compression.
Right.
And clearly you can't make up for that with head flow.
We're not trying to stack the deck for the Ford or make the Chevy look bad.
No, this is parts.
This is strictly a bunch of data points from our part selection. But that's going to get everybody fired up about it. And the nice thing about that is we can just keep going with this, and there's more to do. So you know what I call this? Great success.
Nice.